Our topic is servant leadership. And again, it may seem like this is not quite appropriate. We should be talking about crisis management and burnout. Well, we'll leave that for somebody else. Um, but I'm going to talk with you all tonight about servant leadership. And as I say to the other folks the other day, what I'm saying to you, I am saying to myself as well in my role as a leader in a mercy educational ministry. So I'm preaching to myself. So, what is servant leadership? Now, we can approach it, first of all, from a secular perspective. And in that sense, it's an altruistic philosophy which supports people who choose to serve first and then lead as a way of expanding service to individuals and communities. Now, I'll say more about that as we move on, but that's the first thing. A servant leader chooses first to serve and then to lead. Servant leaders may or may not hold formal positions. I want you to think about this in your mercy institution. Think of someone who does not have a title, but you look to as a leader within the institution. You understand what I mean by that? Maybe it's a faculty person. It could be the campus minister. Or it could just be someone who is a volunteer in your school. It is not always the person who has the title of board chair, head of school, whatever, who is a greatest example of servant leadership. Servant leaders encourage these qualities: collaboration, trust, there's that trust word that we were just talking about, foresight, listening, and the ethical use of power and empowerment. You know, power is a funny thing, isn't it? um, some people really want to have power, and they're not always the people that you want to be in charge necessarily. So, the servant leader is someone who uses their position of authority for empowerment of children, staff, faculty, parents, whether they listen or not. Now, in the secular world, this concept was developed by the guy who was the head of AT&T back in the 1970s. His name was Robert Greenleaf. And if I can make an analogy with someone today who I think fits this description, he owns a corporation called Jersey Mike's. And some of you on the East Coast may be familiar with Jersey Mike's. He makes a heck of a hoagie or sub or hero sandwich or whatever everybody calls it. And he raised $1 million a few months ago for the food banks in the cities where he operates because he saw the felt need. And this weekend, he is going to, whatever money he makes on Saturday and Sunday of this weekend, he will give 20% prior to Thanksgiving to those food banks again. And he encourages his workers to do the same. And he is all about service. So here's someone from the corporate world. Now, the man may be an atheist, I don't know. But he certainly has a sense of leading by example. So back to our two scripture passages. if we put this in a Christian context and we start out with the 13th chapter of John's Gospel, that is the reading for Holy Thursday. Jesus gets up from the table, washes his disciples' feet, and says to them, "Do you understand what I have done for you?" And generally, they didn't understand the significance of it. And he said, "I am your Lord and Master, but I have come to serve and not to be served. And I have come to set an example for you that as I do, you should follow." So if we are operating not just in a mercy school, but just in a Christian environment, then if we are following the example of Jesus' teaching and Jesus' actions, as a Christian school, we should be setting the example for what it means to serve. So let's go back to that concept of being a servant first. The word servant has kind of a connotation, if you will, in some of our cultural settings. But being a servant leader first begins with the natural feeling that you want to serve before you do anything else. So I want you to think about the position that you hold now. What drew you to that position? Did somebody invite you to that position? Did somebody see something in you that they knew would advance the strength of the institution? Was it a search firm that called upon you because they recognized in you something that would be a good fit for this? Because in Mercy educational institutions, we value servant leaders. Please understand that servant leadership is a value-based reality. And you cannot talk a person into a value or out of the value. We can offer you the ideal, which is servant leadership. I don't think anybody's going to shoot you if you don't see the value that Mercy Education sees in servant leadership. But we hold out this model as an ideal of how to be a follower of Jesus and at the same time be a symbol of mercy to those with whom we serve. So the conscious choice of the servant leader is first to serve. And then in that context, to become the leader in service. This is very different from the person who, I'm the leader first. I'm the leader, and you will recognize that. And I will hold you to that recognition. And then maybe I might serve. There's a difference in our original orientation to this concept of servant leadership. You all know people like this, right? I'm the boss. The person who is the servant leader doesn't have to say I'm the boss. So that's the distinction between the two. If a person is a leader first, they're going to have to choose later if they want to be of service. Once they establish their leadership, they might feel more comfortable taking on the role of service. So the difference between the two, servant first and leader first, makes itself manifest in the care that is taken by the servant first, that other people's highest priority needs are being served. So as you fulfill your role as board member, as board chair, are you considering all of the greatest needs of your constituents at this present time? There is so much to consider. Those of you who are head of school, I don't have to tell you all of the significant needs of your constituents at the present time. The best test of servant leadership is this: do those persons you serve grow as people? Do they, as they're being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to be of service? We pride ourselves, don't we, in Mercy Schools on the service that our students provide outside of the institution. Service is a hallmark of Mercy. And what about the effect that our servant leadership has, especially on those who are maybe more deprived? Lots of our institutions have folks who are somewhat privileged, but some of our institutions have plenty of folks who are struggling. And in this pandemic, they are deciding whether they can send their kids to your school any longer. You know that. You know that they have to decide between their own livelihood, providing their mortgages, their food, their health care, and whether they can send their kids to private school. So in these times, when they, and you know what, just to cut the parents a break for a second, I, not having ever been a parent myself, I sympathize with a lot of you who say it's the parents that are the trouble. So they are at their limit. You know that. You may be exhausted and feel that you're at your limit, but clearly they are at their limits. And as you know from your positions, every day brings something new. So what is the strength and benefit of servant leadership in a Mercy educational institution? Well, first of all, it is a long-term approach to leadership. It is not a quick fix. You don't decide tomorrow, I'm going to be a servant leader and I don't have to ever look back again. In essence, it's a process of how you want to be more than what you want to do. It's a way of being, and it can transfer into your own personal lives, your family lives as well, that has a potential for creating positive change. Now, let's talk about the downside of servant leadership. It's not a quick fix approach, and it is not quickly instilled in an institution. It takes time. And it can be perceived by some of your constituents as soft. I used an example the other day. I don't like to use this language, but I need you to understand that there was one board chair when I was giving this presentation and I finished, and I said, does anyone have any comments? And he said, yeah, that's a bunch of crap. So when that came up, the question is, who invited him to be that board chair? Were they just looking for the big bucks? Or did they recognize in him someone who was interested in being of service to this school, to the students, to the faculty, to the staff, to the parents. That, I think, it would be an important thing to put out in the orientation of bringing people into positions of leadership. So that's by way of saying some people don't see any value in this concept of servant leadership. Some people feel that it's empathizing too much with too many people, and it leads to indecisiveness on the part of the leader. But you has probably also noticed that some leaders leave their constituents battered and bloody. And I certainly hope that is not, I know it's not the case in our mercy institutions. How we exercise our leadership in the role that we have currently. So that's my little introduction there. And before I look at the characteristics, let me see if anybody has anything they want to say. Just give a little wave. Are we making sense so far? Any comment or question that you'd like to raise? Yes, Allison.
Sister, one thought I had in listening to you talk was more along the lines of my day job, but because I fully believe in this and I try to practice the servant leadership approach. I've been told that and I run a small organization that's about 70 staff, but I'm told I'm too accessible. I try to have an open door policy, but maybe my door's too open. So I think there's a balancing act, and you said it's sometimes seen as soft. I'm not sure I'm seen as soft, but that's some of the feedback I've gotten.
Yeah. And I go back to Catherine McCauley. One of my favorite quotes of hers is, she'd rather entertain 99 imposters than turn away one really needy person. So when do you decide to shut your door? You know, so it is a balance, but we have some good examples that we can follow. Anyone else? Well, let's get into the characteristics then. And if you happen to have those handy, you could follow along. There are 11 characteristics of servant leaders. And I sent those to you. And don't worry if you don't have them, because I'm going to name them as I go through. So what kind of characteristics does the servant leader portray? And I touched on this a little bit already. The first one is calling. This notion of being called to leadership is a sense of seeing my role to serve in a value-based organization. Now, I want to give you a caveat about this first one. Unless a person has a natural calling to serve, servant leadership is not easy for them. It may not even be realistic for them. It's not something you can learn. You can maybe follow the example of others, but if you don't see your role as a role of being called, we can't produce that sense for you. So think about the people who invited you to your present role and why they did. Hopefully you see that as an invitation, as a calling to be of service. So the second characteristic is listening. And of course that does talk about open door policy with a balance, we would hope. A listener a person who is able to listen, and I don't know, I don't want to show a hands on this, but how many of us are good listeners? Or how many of us are just waiting for the other person to be quiet so that we can put our view out there? And are we such a good listener that we would be able to repeat back to the individual what we heard them say? Do they sense that we do hear them? And listening is a skill that we can learn. And it's essential if I want to be a servant leader. How do I know what the needs of my constituents are unless I listen? That immediately leads to the quality, characteristic of empathy. Now, some people may look upon this as, you have to be like a wuss, you have to be like wishy-washy. That's not what empathy means. Empathy means that as I listen, I put myself in your shoes. So I don't care whether it's a kindergartner whose puppy died and you're getting the whole sad story, okay? Or a junior high school girl who has been raped by date rape. As you listen to the story, how are you going to respond? Now, this is really hard in this time of pandemic, really hard, especially with the parents. And so many of the folks the other day were getting off the Zoom call to go and speak with parents and to try to listen to the parent in the sense of, I want to understand what you're saying to me. I don't want to talk you out of it. I want to understand where you are coming from. That's the empathy. Now, you don't have to agree, understand. You don't have to agree. And I was thinking of when Jared was talking about the racial issues in Detroit. One of the things that we're all being encouraged to is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Well, you know what? Everybody doesn't want to hear about that. So how do you listen and empathize with persons who would resist a conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion? So this is challenging. This is challenging on a good day, not necessarily in the midst of COVID. But flowing right from that is the fourth characteristic, which is healing. Servant leaders are people whom others want to approach when something traumatic has happened. I don't know how many of you currently are thinking that your exhaustion, you think that your last shred of wisdom is going out the window. Your last sense of good judgment has just left the room. But if I can still allow myself to be the recipient of the person who needs to be heard, sometimes that's all the person needs, believe it or not. Don't you? And listen, I'm telling you this, no matter who you are, you've got to find yourself a good listener or you're not going to survive. Do you have somebody? I don't care who it is. It can be a spouse, a family member. It can be a high school friend. It can be your dog. I don't care who it is. You need someone to listen to you. You need someone to be able to see where you are walking these days and what it is like for you. They can't fix it. And many of the things that come to you, you can't fix. But people need to be heard. And in that hearing, many of these issues are healed. I'll give you an example. For a number of years, I was vice president for student services, dean of students at Gwynedd Mercy University. And there are a lot of times when kids would come zooming into my office and they were having a fit. And I had an administrative assistant who was not much of an administrative assistant, I have to tell you. She was not up to the technical part of the task. But I would hear the kid come in, the college kid, yelling and screaming and demanding to talk to me. And I would hear the assistant say to her, "Now, why don't you just sit down in that chair for a minute and tell me what has you so upset?" So I would hear the conversation. They were yelling at this stupid school. And so when she would just listen and she'd say, "Oh yeah, now I understand that. Yeah, I can see where you're so upset." And she said, now let me see if sister's available. And they said, "Oh, I don't need to see her now. Thank you." And out they would go. Now this girl was worth her weight in gold. Do you understand? Because she did the listening and she couldn't fix a thing. So please find yourself somebody during these days, or you're not going to make it. We're not going to make it. All right, let me just pause there for a minute and see if anybody has anything they'd like to say. We're good? Okay. Feel free to disagree with anything I'm saying too, You don't have to agree with everything. Okie doke. The next characteristic then is awareness. Do other people believe you know what's going on? Do the kids think you know what's going on? Does the faculty? Does the board know what's going on? Does your administrative staff? How aware are you of what is happening in the trenches? A servant leader needs to have the perspective that they are always looking for cues from the environment to inform their opinions and their decisions. You don't have to go along with what you're aware of, but it's important to be aware. Where are the little fires that are, well, actually they're conflagrations at this point. Most of the things you have to be aware of are big and nasty at the present time. So how aware am I of everything I need to be aware of? And I was conscious of what Jared said about being a new board chair. There's so much to be aware of, and where do we get the information? And that's another important thing. Does everyone feel that they have an opportunity to be represented to you in your role? The next characteristic is persuasion. Now, you can get people to do what you want them to do by making them afraid enough or guilty enough. But that's not what the servant leader does. The servant leader attempts to convince others to do things because they want to do them, rather than forcing them to do them. Now, this is a quality that I believe can be developed in people. It may not come naturally that you're a good persuader, but there are ways that we can get people on board with what we want to do. And usually that's not with an authoritarian approach. It is something that we are able to create that people want to be a part of the process. And in order to do that persuasion, the next characteristic is conceptualization. I heard a few of you say at the beginning, that some of your staff and some of your parents, they only see the little picture, right? They only see their situation. If I am a servant leader, this process of conceptualization means that I see the big picture. And I try to put that picture out for others to consider. They may not agree, but they encourage others to dream bigger and to avoid getting bogged down by the day-to-day realities. And that is really a tough thing to do at the present time. To think beyond the moment. And the trouble is, there is so much that is unknown that it's frightening. It's frightening for folks. But can we encourage others to see the big picture? Can we encourage the parents? Now, they may not see it, but can we encourage them to do that? Can we encourage the staff? Everybody is afraid. So big picture, have a vision, and try to encourage others to share in that vision with you. And part of that vision brings us to the next characteristic, which is foresight. A servant leader anticipates what may occur, and not only anticipates a decision that must be made, but also anticipates the consequences of that decision. I think these days, the decisions that you're all making have far-reaching consequences, and we don't even realize what some of those consequences are going to be. But the servant leader is adept at picking up patterns in the environment and seeing what the future might look like. I think we're all aware that education as we've done it up till now is not going to stay the same. I think that we've learned that there are different ways of learning, and this virtual hybrid thing may not go away for a long time, and it may be a trend toward the future. Also, are we aware of these learning pods, where parents are getting together and hiring a teacher, and they're not going to be in your school anymore? So what are we learning? What are we anticipating moving forward? Because there are so many moving parts to this. This next characteristic, all right, let me stop there. Anybody want to say anything? I mean, these are tough times to be talking about this. Who would like to say something? Are we doing all right, by the way? We hanging in here? Any comment?
Sister, it's Heather. Everything that you're saying, I fully embrace professionally speaking, and I'm lucky enough to be with a firm that our former CEO fully embraced all of these topics and
Wonderful.
transcended it down to all of us, which is fairly interesting because I'm part of one of the largest financial services firms on Wall Street.
Yeah.
And so servant leadership not only extends to the teams that we're leading, but it also extends into values-based investing and values-based client relationships, which extends to just about every other part of your life. So to further validate what you're saying, everything is so connected and
Yes.
so incredibly important. And all of these topics continue to evolve as you evolve as a person, professionally, personally, or what have you.
Yeah.
And I think that the biggest gift of servant leaders is to pass all of these traits down from a mentoring perspective
Yes.
to the other people that you're able to influence.
Yes. Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
And how lucky were you to have someone in charge like that in the corporate world?
Yes. Indeed.
Wonderful.
Indeed.
Wonderful.
Mhm.
And you know what, as we're going through this, Heather brings up a good point. I want you to think about somebody that you know who is a servant leader and the impact they may have had on you as you are assuming your roles of leadership. I've been lucky enough to know people like this, and I'll tell you, they have been a great inspiration to me over the years. Okay, we have 3 more to do, and I want to spend a little bit of extra time on, oh, bye, Cheryl. Good luck tonight. Stewardship. I think the question I want to ask you is, what are you a steward of? I believe in our roles in Mercy Educational Institutions, we are stewards of the Mercy tradition. So when we start with Jesus washing the feet of the disciples as a servant leader, we're doing the bookend of how does Jesus expect us to live that out. And we believe from Matthew 25 that we're going to be judged on how we did feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, comfort the sorrowful, counsel the doubtful, and for all of us to instruct the ignorant. Okay. And if we do believe that, which Catherine McCauley believed, what she based her whole vision on was that the works of mercy are the business of our lives. So we are stewards of that. And just a little word about steward. A steward is a person to whom something has been entrusted. They don't own it for themselves, okay? Someone entrusted to them. So those of you who are board chairs, this institution has entrusted to you the stewardship of this institution. It is a Catholic mercy institution. Even if you are of a different faith, can you recognize that this has been entrusted to you? And it's entrusted not for you, and for you, those of you who are administrators, heads of school. This ministry has been entrusted to you for those you serve. Those you serve now, and those who will be served into the future. You're doing this for a time. And for this time, you are stewarding the legacy of the Mercy educational tradition. A true servant leader recognizes in that role that it is not just the past and the present that is significant, but how are you forming this legacy, empowering this legacy into the future? I don't always like being on a board, because I like everybody to get along, and those of you who are on boards, everybody doesn't always get along. But in that conversation, in that engagement, each with the other, I am always convinced that these men and women recognize that this treasure that they are stewarding for the present time is not theirs alone. And when they finish their term of office, or when they finish their tenure as administrator, as head of school, are we passing on to those coming after us an untarnished, vibrant legacy of Catholic mercy education? I think that's at the heart of all of this. So think about that. A steward in an organization is responsible for preparing it for its destiny, usually for the betterment of society. And I want to stop a minute, and I'm going to ask you this question. Those of you who have been around for a while would be better able to answer this, I think. Think of your graduates. Think of what some of your graduates are doing. Think of who some of your graduates are. How proud are you of them? And how did they get to be that individual who is out there serving government, serving healthcare, serving science? Just think about some of those graduates, some of those fine, upstanding individuals who will tell you that they owe so much to their mercy education. I hope people do tell you that from time to time. That they credit a lot of their success in life to what you were able to steward on their behalf. I think that's a wonderful responsibility that we have for the period of time. And making a positive difference in the future is a characteristic of this stewardship mentality, that we leave the ministry better than when we found it. Now, I always got up on my soapbox for that one, so I apologize for ranting on, but I think it's important. Of course, if we're good stewards, then naturally there will be growth in the institution, in the organization. Servant leaders have a strong commitment to the growth of people, students, staff, faculty, parents. So how do people see your commitment to helping them to grow and develop? Hopefully they see it pretty clearly. And as a result, the final characteristic is that a servant leader is a builder of community. So if I'm able to engage in all of these processes, and I would say, I don't even think Jesus on his best day would have exemplified all of these characteristics, so don't be feeling too guilty about it. But the last one of building community is, do people feel a stronger sense of community in the organization that you lead? Are we in this? Is there a place for all of us in this organization? So the bottom line on that one is that the servant leader instills a sense of community spirit in the workplace. Okay? So what I'm going to ask you to do, I have 8 minutes after 7 on my clock. I'm going to ask you to take the next 10 minutes and you can, take yourself off and get a gin and tonic or whatever you might want to do. And then this is water, by the way. Come back in 10 minutes. But I'd like you to ask yourself this question. Now, we're not going to have true confessions here, okay? I just want you to think about this. Which of those characteristics do you feel really are part of yourself on a daily basis, on a good day? And which of those characteristics might be something that you and I have to work at? Okay? So if you just take 10 minutes, Kim will bring us back. You can shut yourself off if you want to. And we'll be back to talk about those, not your true confessions, but those concepts, okay? We'll see you 10 minutes from now. And I'm conscious of our time, and I just want to say, I'm nobody really, but I'm so proud to be in the company of such wonderful people. So thank you for what you're doing on the behalf of Mercy Education. I'm nobody, but it's so inspiring to me to know you folks are out there in the trenches, and please know you have my support. If I can ever do anything for you, let me know. Kim?
Thank you for
Thank
your
you, sister.
leadership.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sister Marie Michele. You truly have met us where we are and have inspired us to be our best selves. So thank you for really grounding us in what servant leadership is all about and illuminating all of those wonderful aspects. So we truly have been inspired by your words and very much appreciate all that you bring to us. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I echo Sister Marie Michele in her words. Thank you for your leadership in our schools. We are so fortunate to have such strong leaders and such generosity. So we're very blessed, and I hope that all of you will have the time to rest and really just enjoy some quality time with your family over the Thanksgiving. So I wish you all a very blessed and restful Thanksgiving holiday. So take good care. And
Thanks,
Thank
Kim.
you.
Thanks, sister.
Thank you. Bye now.